So I lived for a month in the governor's residence. And I used to go to work on my little electric cart. So the bus would pull up to the governor's residence, pick me up, take me to work. And about the third day, the bus driver said, "Excuse me, sir, who are you?" He said, "We don't normally come to this neighborhood. And we pick you up every day and we bring you back." And I said, "Well, I had this operation and I can't live at home. I live in a two-story house." And the governor and Michelle are friends of mine, and they said, "Well, we live in a one-story house and you can come over." And so I stayed there until I got a lift put in my house. So it is an inconvenience, and particularly when you're in a wheelchair and you're limited. But I just got back from Antarctica, and I took crutches when I'm walking on ice and so on. And so there's things that you can continue to do. I've met people with arthritis that have very, very severe, and they can be real role models for you, because you see, well, it's like, I think anybody has a limitation. You always find somebody that's got it worse. Then you can say, "Oh, okay, I can do this. If they can do it, I can do it." And I found many people over the years that do that. So yeah, I do have arthritis. It doesn't kill you. It's an inconvenience. I'm lucky I'm a lawyer and I live and practice, right in one town. And although I do travel a lot, I think that's one of the biggest challenges sometimes is traveling, because I like to travel and I do have limitations. But that's a quick summary of my arthritis.
Richard, I'm going to kind of wrap this up, but in some ways you remind me of that person in the Dos Equis commercial. You're the most interesting man in the world if we take a look at Richard McLellan outside of the practice of law and public policy. You've been to a lot of countries. You've been to, I think you're a tribal chief, if I remember correctly.
I am.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about being a tribal chief?
Well, in 1974, George Cushenberry was a 21-year-old legislator, and he introduced me to a guy named Obi Nwankwo, who is a Nigerian. This was during the oil embargo. So Obi convinced me that I could become a billionaire by going over to Nigeria and making tons of money. Well, I started to go to Nigeria, met a guy named John Umanyora, now His Royal Highness John Ezedirama Usadanima Umanyora, the Igwe of Obaniki. And I got interested in Africa. I got interested in West Africa, and over the years, I have been back to Nigeria a number of times. I went with Colin Powell to the elections. I also then got involved through Governor Engler with President Rawlings of Ghana, and have been to Ghana a number of times and have helped President Rawlings on some things. And then most recently, I got a phone call from His Royal Highness, who's the Nigerian, who said, "Would you go meet the president of Sierra Leone?" So I flew over there and met the president of Sierra Leone for 2 days before I had to fly back and meet you to go to Havana. So I've been lucky to travel to Nigeria, to West Africa, represented the transitional government of Somalia. I also got to do elections. 1990, President Bush sent me to Bulgaria as the Soviet Union was unwinding, and I went 6 years later to the second Bulgarian presidential election, and then I did a Nigerian election. So 3 elections. I've been to Antarctica 3 times just because I'm intrigued with Antarctica. And I do like to travel, and I hope if I ever really retire, I'll get to do more.
The one story that I remember is that as a 10-year-old, maybe younger, you had a set of encyclopedias back in Pawpaw, and it had 18 volumes, and you started out reading each of those volumes.
Yeah. My father sold, and he lost his job and then ended up being an encyclopedia salesman, and of course we bought the 1953 edition of World Book. And I'd never had a encyclopedia before. You could go down to the library and look. But I started to read it, and it's just fascinating. And so I am kind of an information junkie, and Thank God there was no internet back then. Who knows what I might have done. But I read it, and I remember just seeing the diversity of ideas and things that you need to know. And yes, so I read a large part of the world.
What struck me about that is that just, I think, illustrates that even from a young age, you've had this interest in a wide range of subjects. And even though one topic in the encyclopedia might be kind of boring, the next topic in the book might be totally fascinating. Yeah. And so what your career has shown is that you've developed this passion and this interest in a wide variety of issues, whether it's relates to charter schools or casino gaming or things like that.
I remember the day John Engler learned that Matt Engler, his father, had a brain tumor. He came right over to my house because he knew I had all these books on neuroscience and maps of the brain. And I said, he knew that, and I knew that, but I didn't know anybody else did. But it was a kind of an interesting thing that he knew. He's not unlike me. He has a junk mind, and he would be interested in all kinds of things. But he knew that I had already been somehow interested in neuroscience because I'm interested in language. Then I'm interested in, so one thing leads to another, and you get into all these different areas, and that's what I have done my whole life. I hope to keep doing it for a while.
Let me conclude this by quoting a recent reporter who wrote an article about you, and I think she said something to the effect that Richard McLellan is perhaps the most influential person in public policy in Michigan who you've never heard of. Yeah. Well, the viewers of this particular program now have, I think, a pretty good knowledge of Richard McLellan. And Richard, thank you so much.
It's been fun. Thank you, Bob. It's been a fun talk.